Let's start by being honest about what that title actually means, because the honesty is what makes this list worth your time. No American city is going to turn on the tap tomorrow and get nothing. That is not how this works. When we say a city runs out of water, what we really mean is the moment it can no longer reliably meet its own demand. The point where the choices stop being easy and start being brutal. Mandatory rationing, water bills that double and triple, building moratoriums that freeze a city's growth, farms going fallow, utilities buying emergency water at whatever price the market demands. That is what running out looks like in a wealthy country, not an empty faucet. A slow closing of options until the only ones left are painful. And here's the thing that most lists like this get wrong. They treat running out of water as one problem. It is not. There are at least 5 completely different ways an American city can run out, and understanding the difference is the entire point. There is the city drying up in an acute drought. The city built on a shrinking, overpromised river. The city mining ancient groundwater that will never come back. The city that is huge but sits on a source that is small. And the city where the water is still there, but the sea is turning it to salt. 5 different deaths, and this ranking includes all of them. One more piece of honesty before we count down. This is a reasoned ranking, built on documented water stress, not a prophecy. Reasonable people could shuffle the order. And you will notice something strange as we go. Some of the most famous names on this list are actually among the best defended, because being loud about a water crisis usually means you have been fighting it the hardest. The cities that should really scare you are sometimes the quiet ones. So let's count down, from 7 to 1, the American cities running out of water first, and exactly how each one is going to get there. Number 7. Miami, Florida, and Miami is on this list because of the strangest mechanism of all, the one that has nothing to do with drought. Miami sits in a place drowning in water. It rains constantly, the ocean is on 3 sides, the streets flood on sunny days. And yet its drinking water is under threat because of a process called saltwater intrusion. Nearly all of South Florida drinks from the Biscayne Aquifer, a shallow layer of porous limestone sitting just a few feet underground, supplying more than 1 billion gallons a day across 3 counties and around 2.5 million people in Miami-Dade alone. But that same porous limestone is the vulnerability. As the city pumps fresh water out and as the rising sea presses in, saltwater seeps inland through the rock and contaminates the aquifer from below. In the most affected zone of Miami-Dade, the underground salt front has been creeping inland at around 100 meters a year. Broward County, next door, expects to lose roughly 40% of its coastal well capacity to saltwater under 2 feet of sea level rise, projected by 2060. Now, in fairness, this is the slowest moving crisis on the list, and Miami-Dade is actively managing it, keeping its main well fields well to the west of the salt line, and for now the utility says its primary supply is not threatened. But it is the perfect illustration of the first lesson. Running out of water does not always mean the water is gone. Sometimes it is still right there under your feet, and it has simply turned undrinkable. Number 6, Los Angeles, and Southern California more broadly. This is the giant of the list, around 19 million people in the greater region, and it earns its place through sheer dependence, because Los Angeles barely has any water of its own. It imports the vast majority of what it drinks from hundreds of miles away, through 3 great straws: the Colorado River to the east, the State Water Project, pulling from Northern California, and the aqueduct that drains the Owens Valley in the Eastern Sierra. Every one of those sources is under strain. The Colorado is shrinking. The Sierra snowpack that feeds the other 2 swings wildly from flood to drought year to year. And when the wildfires tore through the Pacific Palisades in early 2025, hydrants ran dry in the hills, a brutal reminder that even LA's system has limits under stress. But here is why Los Angeles is only number 6, and not higher. No city on this list has a deeper bench of alternatives. It has the largest seawater desalination plant in the hemisphere at Carlsbad. It is building one of the most ambitious water recycling programs in the country, aiming to purify wastewater back into supply on a massive scale, and its regional water agency holds enormous reserves. Los Angeles is on this list for the scale of its dependence. But it is also the clearest proof of the honest rule. Being famous for your water problem is not the same as being first to run out. L.A. has money, engineering, and decades of planning, and that buys an enormous amount of time. Number 5. Las Vegas, Nevada, and Las Vegas is the city everyone expects to see at the very top of a list like this. So let me tell you why it is only number 5. Because the real story is the opposite of its reputation. Yes, Las Vegas depends on the Colorado River for about 90% of its water, drawn from Lake Mead, which has fallen to near its lowest level ever, hovering not far above the elevations where the crisis becomes existential. On paper, that sounds like the most vulnerable city in America. But look at what Las Vegas actually did. Over the last 2 decades, it cut its water use per person by 58%, even while adding roughly 876,000 new residents, and its total water use actually went down. It recycles nearly 99% of every drop used indoors. It banned and tore out grass, removing hundreds of millions of square feet of it. And it spent $1.5 billion building a so-called third straw, an intake at the very bottom of Lake Mead that can keep pulling water even if the lake falls near dead pool. Las Vegas is, by the numbers, the most water-disciplined big city in the American West. It is on this list because its supply is genuinely precarious, but it ranks below the cities beneath it because it saw this coming 20 years ago and has been fighting harder than almost anyone. The loudest alarm is often the best prepared house. Number 4. Atlanta, Georgia. And now the list takes a turn that surprises almost everyone, because Atlanta breaks the rule that water crises belong to the desert. Atlanta sits in the humid southeast, in a region of generally abundant rainfall, and it is deeply water insecure, for a reason that has nothing to do with drought and everything to do with geography. Atlanta is an enormous metropolitan area, 5 to 6 million people, and it is perched on the headwaters of a relatively small river, the Chattahoochee. It gets around 70% of its water from a single reservoir, Lake Lanier, built in the 1950s. And Lake Lanier makes up just 6% of its river basin's area, while supplying over 60% of the region's stored water. In other words, a major American metropolis is balanced on a small stream. That precariousness has fueled the tri-state water wars. A legal battle stretching back more than 30 years between Georgia, Alabama, and Florida over who has rights to that water. A fight in which courts have at times ruled that Lake Lanier was never even authorized to supply Atlanta's drinking water in the first place. In the 2007 drought, the region came within about 35 days of running dry. And as a fresh drought grips the southeast, Atlanta has few options, because it sits inland with no ocean to desalinate and a water plan that leans almost entirely on those same overstretched reservoirs. Atlanta is number 4 because it proves that rain does not equal security. What matters is how much of it you can actually store and legally claim. Number 3. Lubbock, Texas, and the cities of the High Plains. And this one earns its place because it faces the only truly permanent death on the list. Across the High Plains, from the Texas Panhandle up through Kansas and Nebraska, communities sit atop the Ogallala Aquifer, the largest underground freshwater reserve in the country, spanning 174,000 square miles beneath 8 states. But the Ogallala is fossil water, accumulated over many thousands of years, and on human timescales, it does not refill. It is being pumped out several times faster than the trickle that recharges it. In parts of Texas and Kansas, the water table has already dropped more than 200 feet, and near Lubbock, One well fell over 250 feet in the second half of the 20th century. The most stressed zone, running from Lubbock north to the Kansas-Nebraska line, is entering what researchers bluntly call a period of permanent depletion. Some counties are projected to have less than 25 years of groundwater left, and in Texas, a century-old law called the rule of capture makes it worse. If you own the land above the aquifer, you can pump as much as you want, so no one has any incentive to stop. This is why Lubbock ranks above Atlanta and Las Vegas. Those cities face crises that hard choices could still solve. You cannot conserve your way out of a bank account that never receives another deposit. When the Ogallala is gone, it is gone for millennia, and the towns built on it have to reinvent how they exist, or empty out. Number 2. Phoenix, Arizona. And Phoenix takes the number 2 spot because it is the largest city in America facing the most complete structural trap. A city where not one but 2 independent water supplies are failing at the same time. Phoenix, nearly 5 million people in its metro area, is one of the fastest growing regions in the country, and it stands on a 2-legged stool. The first leg is the Colorado River, delivered across the desert by the Central Arizona Project Canal. But to get the federal funding to build that canal back in 1968, Arizona agreed to take the lowest priority water in the entire lower basin, meaning it is cut first and deepest when the river falls short. For years, those cuts were absorbed by Arizona's farmers, whose Colorado River allocation was slashed 65%, then cut to 0. That shock absorber is now used up, which means the next cuts come for the cities. The second leg is groundwater, and in 2023, the state's own model found that Metro Phoenix faces roughly 4.9 million acre-feet of unmet groundwater demand over the next century, an aquifer that officials say has reached its limits, prompting a halt on new subdivisions that rely on it. So Phoenix has 2 failing water sources, a growth engine that will not slow down, and no easy replacement for either. It is not the most imminent crisis on this list. It is the biggest one, a structural insolvency at the scale of a major American city, with no single fix available. And number 1, the American city running out of water first. Corpus Christi, Texas, and it takes the top spot for the simplest and most sobering reason. It is not a projection. It is already happening. In January of 2026, Corpus Christi, a city of about 320,000 people, declared a water emergency, the first American city to do so this year. Its primary reservoir, Lake Corpus Christi, had fallen to 19% of capacity. Its backup, the water it shares with agriculture, is under contested allocation. And underneath the drought lies a self-inflicted wound that makes Corpus Christi a warning for the whole country. Its water infrastructure is failing by neglect, not by poverty. The average age of its pipes is 47 years, and the system loses roughly 22% of its treated water to leaks before it ever reaches a tap. The city knew. A 2019 study recommended $2.3 billion in upgrades. The city funded a fraction of it. So Corpus Christi is number 1, not because it is the biggest or the most famous, but because it is the closest to the edge right now, today, and because it reveals the distinctly American version of this crisis. This is not a poor country running out of water because it cannot afford pipes. It is a wealthy one running out because, for decades, it chose not to fix them. So let's step back, because the ranking itself is less important than the pattern it reveals. Look at how these 7 cities actually run out. Corpus Christi is an acute drought colliding with decades of neglect. Phoenix and Las Vegas and Los Angeles are all tied to a shrinking, overpromised river, a structural gap between what was promised and what exists. Lubbock is mining ancient water that will never return. Atlanta is a giant balanced on a small stream, hemmed in by law. And Miami's water is being poisoned by the rising sea from below. 5 completely different mechanisms, all unfolding in the same country at the same time. And here is the honest thread that ties them together. and the thing worth remembering after the numbers fade. Almost every city on this list built itself on a single, unspoken assumption that its water source was permanent, that the river would always flow, the aquifer would always fill, the reservoir would always hold, the sea would always stay out. And every one of them is now discovering that the assumption was never true. The water was always a loan, not a possession. But notice, too, the strange comfort buried in this list. The cities that made it here are, for the most part, the ones paying attention. Las Vegas conserved. Los Angeles is recycling and desalinating. Miami is monitoring its salt line and moving its wells. Phoenix caught its own groundwater shortfall because it had a law requiring it to look. Ending up on a list of cities running out of water often means a city is awake to the danger and fighting it. The places that should truly worry you are the ones not on any list at all. The ones still pumping, still building, still assuming, that have not yet done the math on how much water they actually have, and how long it will really last. Because in the end, the question was never really which American city runs out of water first. It is which ones are